The evening sun was slowly sinking behind the tall glass buildings of the city when a black luxury car stopped in front of the Grand Regency Hotel. The doors of the car opened, and out stepped a man whose presence immediately drew attention. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, his shoes shining as if polished only minutes ago, and his posture carried the confidence of someone who had seen the world. His name was Monsieur Laurent, a French millionaire known for his investments in businesses across Europe and now, for the first time, visiting the city to discuss new opportunities. The staff at the hotel had been informed of his arrival hours earlier. The manager, Mr. Collins, had personally made sure the red carpet was rolled out at the entrance. Every detail mattered because the reputation of the hotel often rested on how they treated such high-profile guests. The doormen stood extra straight, the bellboys rushed to take position, and even the receptionist kept rehearsing the lines she was going to say in welcome. But there was one detail no one had expected. Monsieur Laurent preferred to speak only in his native language, French. He believed that if he was paying a high price for luxury, the staff should accommodate him, not the other way around. For him, language was part of respect, and he didn't compromise on it. When he walked in, heads turned. Guests in the lobby whispered quietly, admiring the polished man who carried himself like royalty. The millionaire glanced around, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the grand lobby. Mr. Collins stepped forward with a big smile plastered on his face, his hand slightly trembling though he tried hard to hide it. "Welcome, monsieur," Collins began in English, bowing his head slightly. The Frenchman replied at once, in rapid French, his tone polite but clear. Collins froze. The sound of the language was smooth yet completely foreign to him. He tried to nod as if he understood, but inside, his chest tightened. He had prepared many things for this moment: the special room on the top floor, the finest food, the polite words of welcome, but he had never prepared for the fact that the man would not understand or speak English. The millionaire spoke again, this time a little slower, perhaps realizing the hesitation. Still, it was in French, and the words danced in the air like music Collins could not catch. His smile remained stiff, and small beads of sweat appeared near his hairline. Guests in the lobby noticed the awkward silence. Collins, desperate, tried to recall the few French words he had heard in movies. "Bonjour," he said, his accent thick and incorrect. Then he added, "Oui, merci." It sounded clumsy, almost childish, and a few of the younger staff members exchanged quick glances, struggling not to laugh at the manager's performance. Monsieur Laurent's eyebrows raised slightly, though he remained polite. He repeated his sentence again, this time pointing gently towards the reception desk as if trying to explain what he needed. Collins, not understanding, looked at the receptionist, who looked back helplessly. None of them knew what he was saying. The manager's heart was racing. If he failed in this moment, it would not only embarrass him but also the hotel. Losing a millionaire guest could mean losing future business opportunities, and worse, earning a bad reputation in the industry. The Frenchman now gestured more firmly. He wanted to explain his needs, but without the language, frustration began to show on his face. His voice grew sharper, though not rude. He was a man who expected efficiency, and what he saw now was far from it. Collins quickly reached for a small phrase book that had been kept at the reception counter for emergencies. He flipped through the pages nervously, the sound of paper turning quickly filling the silent space. "Chamber, repose," he muttered, trying to piece together words that he didn't understand. The pronunciation was so broken that it hardly resembled French. The millionaire blinked, confused, then sighed deeply. Meanwhile, the guests in the lobby were now openly observing the scene. Some were amused, others curious. A couple sitting nearby leaned toward each other, whispering, "Doesn't the staff of such a big hotel know French?" The tension was building. Collins tried one more time, pointing to the elevator and saying, "Room, upstairs, bonjour." His words made no sense, and his cheeks burned with embarrassment. He felt small in front of the guest he wanted so badly to impress. The Frenchman finally crossed his arms, his patience nearly gone. He tapped his watch lightly, a gesture that said he did not have much time to waste. Collins swallowed hard. He wished the ground would open and swallow him whole. He thought about calling another staff member, but none of them spoke French. The receptionist shook her head, the bellboys avoided eye contact, and even the concierge quietly stepped back, afraid to make the situation worse. For a moment, silence filled the grand lobby, broken only by the distant sound of clinking glasses from the hotel bar. Collins forced himself to keep smiling, but his hands were shaking as he gripped the phrase book. He was sweating under the weight of the eyes watching him, not just the millionaires but also those of the other guests and his own staff. The Frenchman spoke again, his tone firm, and this time he gestured toward the dining area, then toward the conference rooms. It was clear he was trying to give instructions about his requirements for his stay. Collins opened his mouth to respond but no words came out. His throat felt dry, his mind blank. It was at that exact moment that something unexpected began to unfold, but that part of the story was still hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right voice to rise. The silence in the lobby was growing heavier with every passing second. Mr. Collins stood frozen, clutching the small phrase book in his hand like a lifeline, but the words on the pages seemed like strange symbols to him. His eyes ran over them quickly, but none made sense in the moment. His mind was too panicked to focus. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on his shoulders. The millionaire's presence was like a test, and he was failing miserably in front of his own staff and the other guests who had started paying attention. Monsieur Laurent, the French millionaire, was still trying to explain his needs. His gestures became sharper. He pointed towards the reception, then towards the dining area, and finally at the elevators. Each motion was clear, but without language, the meaning was lost. Collins tried to guess, nodding at random, but the Frenchman's frown told him he was getting it wrong. The receptionist, a young woman named Clara, whispered quietly to the manager. "Sir, maybe we can call a translator service on the phone," she suggested. Her voice was hopeful, but Collins knew it would take time to arrange. Time was exactly what he did not have. A wealthy guest like Laurent expected immediate service, not delays. "No, no. I must handle this," Collins muttered under his breath. His pride was stinging. He was the manager of one of the city's finest hotels. How could he admit defeat so quickly? Laurent spoke again, this time more firmly. His voice carried across the lobby, and though no one understood his words, the frustration behind them was clear. He tapped his foot slightly, then pulled out a piece of paper from his jacket pocket, writing something in French before sliding it across the counter. Collins stared at the words, but they might as well have been written in another alphabet. His heart sank. He looked up at Laurent, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. Oui, merci," he said again, the only words he seemed to know. He gestured awkwardly for a bellboy to take the luggage, hoping to at least move things forward. The bellboy, nervous, took the bags, but even he looked uncertain, waiting for instructions. The situation grew more uncomfortable with each moment. A couple of businessmen sitting nearby whispered to each other in amusement. A child tugged on his mother's hand, asking loudly, "Why is the man not talking in English?" The mother hushed him, but the words had already added to Collins's embarrassment. Inside, Collins was panicking. His forehead was damp with sweat, and his collar felt tight around his neck. He flipped through the phrase book again, searching desperately. "Repose, chamber, conference," he stuttered, trying to string together a sentence. But his pronunciation was so far from correct that even Clara winced slightly at the sound. Laurent stared at him, his eyes filled with disbelief. Here he was, in one of the city's most expensive hotels, and the manager could not even understand him. He had expected smooth service, someone who could match his sophistication. Instead, he found chaos. The millionaire shook his head slowly and spoke again, this time raising his voice slightly. His tone was not rude, but it was sharp enough to cut through the air. He wanted to make sure his needs were understood. Collins, however, only heard an unfamiliar rhythm, like music without meaning. He felt smaller with each passing second. At this point, the entire staff was nervous. The concierge, standing near the door, stepped forward as if to help but then stopped when he realized he knew no French either. Clara looked helplessly at Collins, waiting for guidance. The bellboy stood silently with the luggage, not daring to move. It was as if the whole hotel had frozen, watching their leader stumble in confusion. Collins thought of one last idea. Google Translate, he whispered to himself. He pulled out his phone quickly, typing in a few words in English and showing the French translations to Laurent. The millionaire glanced at the screen, but his face did not soften. The sentences were clumsy and incomplete. Machine translation was no match for the speed and elegance of natural speech. The seconds stretched into minutes, and the atmosphere in the lobby became unbearable. The guests were no longer whispering quietly, some were openly staring now. Collins's ears burned. His reputation, his dignity, and perhaps even his job felt like they were slipping away in front of him. He wanted nothing more than to run away from the situation, but he was trapped. Laurent finally sighed heavily, a sound filled with disappointment. He folded the paper back into his pocket and crossed his arms. His eyes swept across the staff, as if silently questioning whether anyone in this grand hotel could truly serve him. For the first time since his arrival, his polished elegance was mixed with clear irritation. Collins felt his throat tighten. He wanted to apologize, but what words could he use when the man did not understand English? He looked around desperately. His staff lowered their eyes, avoiding his gaze. No one wanted to step forward. Everyone seemed to hope that someone else would solve the problem. Collins tried again, stammering broken words from the phrase book. Saul, manger, repose, domain, his tongue twisted, and the sounds came out all wrong. Laurent closed his eyes briefly, shaking his head as if to say this was hopeless. The humiliation was complete. Collins felt the weight of failure crushing him. He imagined the news spreading, Grand Regency fails to serve millionaire guest. He thought of complaints, bad reviews, and angry calls from the hotel's owners. His heart pounded faster. The lobby, usually filled with music and soft conversations, now felt like a stage where every mistake was being magnified. Even the chandeliers seemed to shine too brightly, highlighting his discomfort. He could hear his own heartbeat, loud and uneven. Just as the tension reached its peak, something unexpected began to stir. A voice that had remained quiet until now was about to rise. It was not the manager's voice, nor the receptionist's, nor the concierge's. It came from a corner of the lobby where no one had thought to look. It was the voice of someone who had been working silently, carrying no authority, and holding no official responsibility in this matter. Yet in that moment, this voice was about to change everything. The silence in the lobby was suddenly broken by a soft but confident sound. It was a voice that no one had expected to hear at that moment. The words flowed smoothly, like water running over polished stones, and though many in the lobby could not understand them, the beauty of the language was unmistakable. Bonsoir, monsieur. Comment puis-je aider, the voice said gently. Everyone turned at once. Standing a few steps away was Maria, one of the hotel's maids. She wore a simple uniform, her hands still carrying the cloth she had been using to polish the brass handles of the doors. Until that moment, she had been invisible, blending into the background like most housekeeping staff usually did. But now, with just a single sentence, she had pulled all attention toward herself. Monsieur Laurent's expression changed instantly. His tense features relaxed, and his sharp eyes softened with surprise and relief. He looked at Maria as if she had just rescued him from a storm. Collins blinked, frozen where he stood. His mind took a second to process what had just happened. Maria, the maid he had always known as quiet and hard-working, had spoken in perfect French, not broken, not hesitant, but smooth, elegant, and natural, like someone who had lived in France all her life. Laurent responded immediately, speaking in his native tongue with a flood of words. His voice carried both relief and eagerness now that he finally had someone who could understand him. He gestured lightly as he spoke, his tone polite again, no longer filled with frustration. Maria listened carefully, nodding with understanding. Her eyes showed calmness, and her posture carried quiet confidence. She replied to him fluently, her sentences flowing with the same rhythm and charm that made the French language so admired. For a moment, the entire lobby seemed frozen in awe. The receptionist, Clara, stood with her mouth slightly open. The bellboys looked at each other in disbelief. Even the concierge, who usually carried himself with arrogance, was staring at Maria as if seeing her for the first time. Collins's face turned pale, then flushed red. A mixture of emotions flooded him: shock, embarrassment, relief, and even admiration. He wanted to interrupt, to reassert his role as manager, but his tongue refused to move. The contrast between his clumsy attempts and Maria's effortless fluency was too sharp. Laurent continued explaining his requirements: a suite on the top floor, special meals with French touches, and a conference room for his meetings. Maria translated everything quickly and clearly to Collins and the staff. Her words were simple in English yet carried all the exact details the guest wanted. For the first time since Laurent's arrival, the instructions became clear. "Mr. Collins," Maria said gently, "Monsieur Laurent would like the rosewood suite prepared for his stay. He also needs arrangements for a private dining service tonight, preferably French cuisine. Tomorrow morning, he requires a conference room with seating for 12. Collins nodded quickly, almost too quickly. "Yes, yes, of course," he said, rushing to give orders to the staff. His heart was still beating fast, but now it was out of relief rather than panic. Laurent smiled warmly at Maria and spoke again, this time slower, as if savoring the joy of being understood. Maria replied with ease, her tone respectful but not submissive. She carried herself with dignity, showing no trace of fear in front of the wealthy guest. The atmosphere in the lobby shifted completely. What had been tense and embarrassing only moments ago was now calm and orderly. Guests who had been watching with amusement now looked impressed. A businessman whispered to his companion, "Remarkable. She speaks French better than anyone I've heard here." Collins, though still embarrassed, began to realize that Maria had saved the hotel from disaster. Without her, Laurent might have walked out, disappointed and insulted. Instead, he now seemed satisfied, even pleased. Maria continued her role naturally, asking the guest if he needed anything else, translating his words smoothly, and guiding the other staff to act quickly. The bellboys carried his luggage upstairs to the suite. Clara arranged the dining service as instructed. The concierge, now humbled, went to make calls for French cuisine options. Laurent looked at Maria again and spoke a little more personally this time, his tone lighter, almost curious. She responded with a small smile, answering politely in French. Though most of the staff could not understand the words, they could feel the warmth in the exchange. It was as if the millionaire was no longer just a demanding guest, but a man enjoying a pleasant conversation. For Collins, the scene was almost painful to watch. He stood slightly to the side, feeling smaller than he ever had in his career. He had spent years building his image as a polished manager, yet in one evening, a maid had outshined him in front of everyone. But at the same time, he could not deny the relief he felt. Maria had turned the disaster into success. The other staff members whispered among themselves when Laurent and Maria walked together toward the elevators, still speaking in French. Their words were filled with wonder. Who knew Maria could speak French like that? One bellboy said. She never told anyone. I thought she was just a maid, another whispered, still staring in disbelief. The truth was that Maria had never been just a maid. Her story, unknown to most, was far richer than her simple uniform suggested. She had studied languages in her younger years, dreaming of a different path, but life's hardships had steered her into domestic work. She had carried her knowledge quietly, never showing it, because no one had ever asked. Now, with one unexpected moment, that hidden part of her life had come to light, and it shone brighter than anyone could have imagined. The lobby, which had once been filled with tension and embarrassment, now buzzed with quiet excitement. Staff members exchanged glances, and even guests seemed to carry a new sense of respect for the hotel. Not because of Collins's management, but because of the maid who had stepped forward when no one else could. As the elevator doors closed behind Laurent and Maria, the staff stood in silence, still absorbing what had just happened. Collins finally cleared his throat, forcing authority back into his voice. "All right, everyone, back to work," he said, though his voice was not as steady as before. He tried to act normal, but inside, he knew things would never quite be the same again. In that moment, it became clear that the course of events had shifted. What had started as an embarrassing failure was now turning into a story no one in the hotel would forget. And at the center of it all was Maria, the maid whose voice had not only broken the silence but had also changed everything. The elevator ride to the Rosewood suite was short, but during those few minutes, the balance of power in the hotel seemed to change. Maria stood beside Monsieur Laurent, answering his questions in fluent French, while the bellboys quietly carried his luggage. Collins stayed behind in the lobby, pretending to check something in the reception log, but in truth he was avoiding the awkward sting of his own failure. His hands shook slightly as he straightened the papers on the desk, though they did not need straightening. He kept replaying the scene in his head, every clumsy word, every bead of sweat on his forehead, every glance of pity from his staff. Upstairs, the suite doors opened. The bellboys placed the luggage carefully in the room. Maria walked inside with the confidence of someone who belonged, even though she wore the plain uniform of a maid. Laurent, still speaking warmly in French, thanked the bellboys and handed them a generous tip. But his eyes remained on Maria. "Vous parlez magnifiquement," he said with admiration. "Your French is magnificent." Maria smiled modestly. "Merci, monsieur. J'ai appris depuis mon enfance." "Thank you, sir. I learned since childhood." Laurent looked surprised. He had expected broken French at best, but what he heard from Maria was polished, elegant, and precise. It was not the French of a tourist or a casual learner, it was the French of someone who had truly studied the language deeply. For Maria, speaking French again after so long felt like rediscovering a part of herself she had buried. Years of working silently as a maid had dulled her confidence, but tonight her voice carried strength. She remembered the afternoons of her youth when she used to sit by the window with French novels in hand, her teachers praising her accent, her dreams filled with ideas of travel and education. Life had taken a different turn, but the knowledge had stayed with her, waiting for the right moment to reappear. Laurent continued explaining his needs for the next few days: the meetings, the meals, the arrangements for his business partners. Maria listened carefully, responding with clarity and precision. For him, it was as though a heavy burden had lifted. No longer did he feel stranded in a foreign land, he felt understood. After finishing, Laurent looked at her thoughtfully. "It is rare," he said in French, "to find someone with your talent in a place like this. Why are you working as a maid?" Maria's smile faltered for a second. She lowered her eyes politely before answering. "Life does not always give us the path we choose, monsieur. But skills, once learned, never leave us." Laurent nodded slowly, clearly moved by her words. He admired not only her language but also the quiet dignity in her answer. He respected people who carried themselves with humility even when their abilities could outshine others. Meanwhile, in the lobby, Collins was pacing behind the reception desk. Clara approached him cautiously. "Sir. Maria seems to be handling everything very well," she said softly. Collins's jaw tightened. "Yes," he replied sharply, though he knew she was right. "But it is my responsibility to manage the guest. It should not have come to this." Clara hesitated, then added carefully, "Still, if it wasn't for her, I think Monsieur Laurent might have left by now." Collins said nothing. His pride would not let him admit the truth, but deep inside, he knew it. Maria had saved him, saved the hotel, and saved their reputation. The thought both relieved and humiliated him. The staff whispered among themselves when they had a chance. "Did you hear her French?" one of the bellboys said in awe. "She sounded like she had lived there all her life." "I didn't even know she could speak another language," Clara admitted quietly. "She never told anyone." "That's Maria," another replied. "Always quiet, always working hard, never showing off." Back in the suite, Maria finished noting down Laurent's requests. He looked at her with genuine appreciation. "I must say, you have impressed me more than the entire management here," he said. Maria's cheeks warmed, but she replied with humility. "I am only doing my duty, monsieur." Laurent shook his head lightly. "No. This is beyond duty. You have turned my frustration into comfort. That is rare." When Maria returned to the lobby after ensuring the guest was settled, the atmosphere shifted again. The staff looked at her differently now, their eyes filled with respect instead of casual dismissal. Even Clara, who had always seen her as just another maid, smiled warmly at her. Collins, however, stood stiffly near the desk, pretending to review documents. He avoided Maria's eyes at first, but finally he looked up. Their gazes met, and for a moment, words were not necessary. Both knew what had happened. Collins cleared his throat. "Maria," he said, trying to sound formal, "good work with the guest." Maria nodded politely. "Thank you, sir." Her tone was respectful, but she did not lower her eyes. For the first time, she felt like an equal in that lobby. The rest of the evening passed more smoothly. Thanks to Maria's translations, the staff carried out Laurent's instructions perfectly. The dining service was arranged, the suite prepared with special touches, and the conference room booking confirmed. The hotel, which had been on the brink of disaster, now looked professional again, but everyone knew it was Maria's doing, not Collins's. As the night deepened, Collins sat in his office, staring at his desk lamp. The shadows on the wall seemed to whisper the truth he didn't want to admit: a maid had succeeded where he had failed. His pride burned, but so did a strange sense of gratitude. He thought back to the moment when Laurent had nearly walked out. Without Maria, his career might have collapsed tonight. Maria, on the other hand, sat quietly in the small staff room, sipping tea during her break. She felt a mix of emotions: relief that she had been able to help, pride in using her forgotten skill, and a quiet joy at having earned respect. For years, she had cleaned floors, polished brass, and carried laundry without anyone ever asking what else she could do. Tonight had shown them a glimpse of who she truly was. The whispers among the staff did not stop. Some spoke of admiration, others of surprise. But one thing was certain: the way they looked at Maria had changed forever. She was no longer invisible. And somewhere in the suite above, a French millionaire was thinking about the maid who spoke his language as if it were her own, wondering how such a talent had gone unnoticed in a grand hotel filled with people who claimed to be professionals. That night, the Grand Regency Hotel learned a quiet but powerful lesson: greatness does not always come dressed in fine suits or polished titles. Sometimes, it is hidden in plain sight, wearing a simple uniform, waiting for the right moment to be heard. The next morning, the lobby of the Grand Regency was brighter than usual. Sunlight poured through the tall glass windows, spilling golden rays across the polished marble floor. Staff members moved quickly, carrying trays, arranging flowers, and preparing for another busy day. But unlike other mornings, there was a sense of quiet excitement in the air. Everyone was still talking about the night before, when Maria had spoken fluent French and saved the hotel from embarrassment. When Maria walked in with her cleaning cart, the whispers followed her again, but this time they carried respect. Bellboys nodded at her politely. Clara, the receptionist, smiled warmly, as if seeing her in a new light. Even the concierge gave her a respectful glance, something he had never done before. Maria, though, carried herself the same as always, calm, humble, focused on her work. She was not the type to show pride, but inside her chest, her heart glowed with a quiet confidence. Meanwhile, Monsieur Laurent was already awake in his suite. Breakfast had been delivered exactly as he requested, with French pastries, fresh fruit, and hot coffee. Maria had helped ensure everything was arranged perfectly. When she came to check on him, he greeted her warmly, speaking to her in his native tongue as if they were old friends. "Merci encore, mademoiselle," he said kindly. "You have made my stay comfortable. Without you, I would have left yesterday in great frustration." Maria smiled. "It was nothing, monsieur. I was only doing what I could." But Laurent shook his head. "No, it was everything. You gave me more than service. You gave me respect in a land where my language is rare. That is not nothing." He paused for a moment, then added, "I will remember this hotel not for its grand chandeliers or its polished floors, but for the maid who spoke to me in perfect French." Maria's cheeks warmed at his words. She bowed her head slightly, not out of shame, but as a gesture of gratitude. Later that morning, Laurent asked Maria to accompany him to the conference room where his business partners were gathering. She translated smoothly as his instructions flowed. The men in suits, who had been prepared to struggle with language barriers, now looked relieved. They admired how Maria bridged the gap between cultures with such ease. Back in the lobby, Collins watched from a distance. Every word Maria spoke reminded him of his own failure the day before. But as he observed, another feeling began to grow: respect. He had always thought of Maria as just another maid, someone to keep the floors shining and the furniture polished. Now he realized she was far more than that. She had carried a skill greater than his own, hidden in silence until the moment came to reveal it. By the afternoon, Laurent requested a private meeting with Collins. The manager entered the suite nervously, adjusting his tie. He half feared Laurent would complain about the previous night, but instead the millionaire greeted him with a smile. "Mr. Collins," Laurent said through Maria's translation, "your hotel is fortunate to have her." He gestured toward Maria, who stood quietly nearby. "She has not only made my stay possible, she has made it pleasant. I travel often, and I rarely see such dedication combined with true talent. Do not underestimate her." Collins nodded, his throat dry. "Yes, monsieur. I understand." Laurent continued, his tone serious. "Sometimes, greatness is hidden in simple clothing. Do not overlook it. Yesterday, your staff looked helpless. Today, thanks to her, your hotel shines. Remember that." Collins swallowed his pride and forced himself to smile. "You are right, monsieur. We are lucky to have her." When the meeting ended, Maria prepared to leave the suite, but Laurent stopped her. He handed her a small card with his personal number written on it. "If you ever wish to work beyond these walls," he said softly in French, "contact me. There are places where your talent will be valued greatly." Maria's eyes widened in surprise. She had never imagined a man of his stature would offer her such a chance. She accepted the card respectfully, tucking it away without a word. That evening, after the business meetings were complete and Laurent's guests had left, he came down to the lobby personally. Instead of speaking to Collins or Clara, he asked to see Maria. When she appeared, wearing the same simple uniform as always, he stood and addressed her in front of everyone. "In my travels," he said in French, with Maria translating for those who listened, "I meet many people who serve out of duty. But rarely do I meet someone who serves out of both skill and heart. You have both. For that, I thank you." He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect that stunned the staff and even Collins. The sight of a wealthy French millionaire bowing to a maid was something none of them would ever forget. The lobby erupted in quiet murmurs. Staff members glanced at each other in awe. Maria, humble as always, simply lowered her head and said softly, "Merci, monsieur." After Laurent left, Collins walked up to her. His pride still ached, but he could not ignore the truth any longer. "Maria," he said in a low voice, "I owe you an apology. Yesterday, I thought I could handle everything on my own. I was wrong. You saved us. You saved me. I see you differently now." Maria looked at him calmly, her eyes steady. "We all have our strengths, sir. Yesterday was simply my turn to use mine." Collins nodded, unable to say more. It was a simple reply, but it carried wisdom that sank deep into his heart. That night, when Maria returned to her small room in the staff quarters, she took out the card Laurent had given her. She turned it over in her hands, thinking about her life. For years, she had worked quietly, letting the world pass by without ever asking what more she could be. But now, she realized something important: her knowledge, her voice, her hidden skills were not gone. They had only been waiting. She slipped the card back into her drawer, not because she planned to ignore it, but because she wanted to think carefully. For the first time in many years, she had choices. That was enough to make her smile. The hotel returned to its usual rhythm in the days that followed, but something had changed. The staff looked at Maria differently. The respect in their eyes lingered. Even Collins treated her with more care, his voice softer when he spoke to her, his tone carrying a weight of unspoken gratitude. The story of the French millionaire and the maid spread quietly among the staff, and soon it became almost a legend within the hotel. New employees were told about Maria, the maid who once saved the hotel with her perfect French. Guests who had witnessed it shared the story with others, adding their own admiration. For Maria, life continued much as before. She still polished brass, carried laundry, and cleaned rooms. But she carried herself differently now, taller, prouder, more certain of her worth. She no longer felt invisible. Her voice had been heard, and once heard, it could never again be silenced. And for Collins, the lesson remained. He had learned that titles and uniforms do not define talent. Respect must be given not only to guests but also to the people who work silently beside you. He never forgot the night when his panic nearly ruined everything, and the maid saved him with a language he could not understand. The Grand Regency Hotel stood taller in reputation after Laurent's visit, but it was not because of its chandeliers or its luxury. It was because of one woman whose simple words, spoken in perfect French, reminded everyone that dignity, intelligence, and greatness often live in the most unexpected places.